Bienvenidos al Instituto Cervantes de Nueva Delhi. Well, today we are going to conduct our session in English, as we have people that have written in this wonderful book, but not in Spanish. But I am really happy, to be able to have this book discussion with such an enticing title, Nomadic Subterfuge of Luso-Indian-Hispanic Narrative in the Conflict Zones. Just when I read this title, the first thing, that struck my mind was the Luso-Indian-Hispanic, because I think Spanish people have a kind of nostalgia for one United Iberia, which never happened, and the relations with our Portuguese friends, are very special to us. Sometimes we live giving the back to each other and we don't know much, but they are really, and this Luso-Indian-Hispanic, it's really a very interesting angle to this book. But of course, I must felicitate first of all the moderators of this session and the people who are really behind it, and Professor Indrani Mukherjee, and also Neus Jimeno. A big clap for them, please. And also for a person who is not here today, Amrit Raj, which is also the third, I think, author of this book. Say that we will unveil the book now, but I would also like to greet Professor Sonia Gupta, Professor of Latin America Studies at Jamia Millia University, Dr. Sunil Tanmi Naina, and forgive me for the pronunciation, Research Fellow at SSS Jawaharlal Nehru University, Dr. P.K. Mangalam, Assistant Professor, the Department of Foreign Language, Central University of Karnataka, and I think you have come all the way from Karnataka to be this evening with us. And Dr. Java Singh, Faculty of the Spanish Department, Indira Gandhi National University. I think I will stop here, and I think we should unveil now the book. Right? Have a careful look to this wonderful design book, right? With plenty of pictures and very good, very artistically done. Okay, I will stop here and let you begin the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, I'm more comfortable writing than talking. It's a privilege to have with us Sonia and Java. I'm not including you guys because I don't know yet. That they are very articulate, they are very good, and they are very clear in their head. Which I'm also there. I'm also clear in my head, but I'm not very articulate while speaking. I'm better at writing. So please read my book. It's a co-edited. You have all your papers, and I hope that the book discussion is going to be fruitful. So I just, on popular demand, I just will take 2 minutes because I was told that I have to speak a little bit about the book. I'll take 2 minutes. So I thought I'll just talk on the title, which is Nomadic and Subterfuges. So Nomadic is, so for example in Chile, when you had the movement of El Violador Eres Tú, yeah? You are the, why don't I English? You are the rapist. Or when we had, for example, in Manipur, the Manorama case, where there were 5 women who just took off their clothes and faced the gun. And so there, that is the confrontational, the open, the body becomes the war machine. If you have read Deleuze, you will understand the body becomes the war machine. And my submission is it's not a tool. Of course, it's a tool. If you think about in the Frankfurt school of thought, but the question of the tool is always of something where in the hands of a privileged European intellectual or a white intellectual, or if we include in our country upper caste intellectual. So the question is, where does the slave go? Where does the queer go? Where does the colored women go? And so we talk about, so this is a basic agenda in the book that I had in mind. It was about embodied, minds which work and bodies which think. And I've given you the example of Chile and Manipur, right? So that is the examples of the Chile and Manipur is nomadic in the Deleuzian ways of thinking, and Subterfuges is about the Baroque, the Spanish Baroque, which is about pretending to say something but actually meaning something else. So the Cervantes is a classic example of the Baroque. I mean, I know that you say it's Renaissance, so if you don't want to call it Renaissance, if you don't want me to give Cervantes as a typical example of Don Quixote, but anything that you know in Baroque. See, for example, the paintings of Velázquez and all of that, and La Literatura Mística, La Literatura Picaresca. So it's the undercurrents of protest and non-conformity. So these are the two things working together, and that's all. I will end here, and now I think I just begin inviting. I think we don't need to, I don't have to talk. I'm not very good at talking. Unless I'm reading something off of a paper, then I manage. So now, so just to tell you the format, Neus and I will introduce them as we proceed. And please jot down your questions so that the question answer session, we can do it as fast as possible so that your questions are ready. Thank you very much. So now, Neus.
I will introduce the first panelist that, just like in the TV program, doesn't need much introducing among the Hispanists in India, which is Professor Sonia Gupta. She's been the founder of 2 centers of Spanish studies here in India, in FLU in Hyderabad and here in Jamia Millia Islamia, where she's currently working. And her specialization is so broad that it's hard to narrow it down to a sentence, but it goes from post-Franco Spanish poetry to Latin American new chronicles, testimonial literature, and even visual culture. She's been also a translator and a comparatist, and also an activist through her student days, but even nowadays she's also a part of the All India Women Association. So, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody, and it's a great pleasure to form part of this book launch, where 3 of my prestigious, loved colleagues have been involved as editors. So congratulations, Indrani, congratulations, Neus, and Amrit, of course. The distinct thing that I like about this book, and for which I really think that Indrani particularly needs to be congratulated, is the fact that they are papers from a conference, a young scholars conference, a graduate conference, and it is just amazing how young scholars have been kind of given entry into the lettered city, into the Republic of Letters, so to say. And sometimes these conferences get lost, and I think it is the diligence with which Indrani works that she has been able to put together these papers. And I've had the good fortune of reading most of them, though a cursory reading, because I haven't had time really. Though I did go through at least 7, 8 of them in detail. And so really I think this is something which is so commendable, Indrani, and the fact that you, Neus and Amrit have been able to put together as Oscar said, such a beautifully brought out volume is really commendable. So, congratulations to begin with. I'll make an initial intervention and then perhaps come back again in the question answer session. So, I will take on from where Indrani left. That is the title itself, you know. So, the idea of the nomad. Well, to be very fair, the first paper that kind of frames the entire book, that by Ochi Kuriel, and I think she was also the keynote speaker, is wonderful in the sense of it's got a mine of wealth in it, you know, theoretical as well as practical. So to begin with, the idea of the nomad, which Indrani has clearly pointed out, she's referred to Deleuze and Guattari's Antioedipus and Thousand Plateaus. But if we remember, the idea of nomads or nomadism comes up in the 70s and 80s or 90s, up to 70s to 90s, which is precisely the period when the Cold War has kind of stopped. The socialist camp in 1990s has disintegrated, and 1986 is, I think, when Thousand Plateaus comes out, no? 87, 86 is so already, I mean, under the weight of the French post-structuralism, particularly after 1968, after the events of 1968, and when there is this entire questioning of the great narratives or the grand narratives, whether it's Marxism, whether it's any kind of teleological liberatory paradigm, we find that Deleuze and Guattari, of course, come up with this sometimes very confusing configuration of lines of flight and molecular flight, and the idea of the nomad as somebody confronting the state away from the state apparatus. So the idea is, and she has also in her introduction talked about the rhizomatic structure, the rhizomatic space in which the nomad inhabits. So the rhizome, if one were to put it very, very, in an easy language, is like adrak, the ginger plant, which grows not vertically, but grows subterraneously, like a rhizome. So the idea is that instead of horizontal structures, party-based structures, here the idea was that this would be a vertical structure. This would be a more horizontal kind of nomadic space, which will not be around a central power pole. Now, if that is the idea of the nomad, and I'm putting it very, very simplistically, but if that is the idea of the nomad, the question arises that who is the real nomad? Because Deleuze and Guattari make it very clear that it is not the immigrant, in the case of France and Spain, for example, it is not even the Roma gypsies, who are nomadic, so they're not referring to nomads in the sense of nomadology and the nomads. And so the nomad, the figure of the nomad, which becomes pretty ubiquitous in French philosophy of that time, well, is basically, as Indrani has also pointed out, a spatial figure. However, I would like to say that like everything, whether it's the Women's Day or anything, the idea or the figure of the nomad has been co-opted in our globalized world, and today we talk about digital nomads. So you have these executives, who say that, look, we are going to work from our laptop, and that laptop can be anywhere. You could be working sitting in an airport, you could be in an office. You don't need an office. So that spatial fixity, which job, etc., gave you, the digital nomad uses technology to have this kind of a thing. But you see, that's exactly where the problem is, that this nomad, the digital nomad, has been co-opted, so to say, by the consumerist culture of capitalist modernity, which actually is what Deleuze and Guattari initially did not wanted to do exactly the opposite. So I find Ochi Kuriel's observation very interesting in the book. So she says that that her decolonial project. She talks about the decolonial feminism in her introductory essay, and she talks about the term El Proyecto Decolonial Cimarrón. And I thought that this was a wonderful, actually metaphor, perhaps capturing what the chapters in the book say much better perhaps even than the figure of the nomad. And why do I say so? So she says, so what is a cimarron to begin with? If she talks about the decolonial project, she calls it El Proyecto Decolonial Cimarron. So what is a cimarron? As most of you would know, the cimarron is the runaway slave. Yeah, it's the runaway slave, no? And it's the, in English, it's the marooned, the slave. So what were these marooned slaves? So basically the maroons refer to people who had escaped slavery. So in Jamaica, Cuba, all these Caribbean islands particularly. So they had escaped slavery to create independent groups or communities away from the barracoon, away from the plantation, away from the barracoon. And so the idea of the cimarron or the runaway slave is that if you look at Afro-American historiography, they basically describe marronage as the liminal and transitional space between slavery and freedom. So what is a runaway slave? The runaway slave is not a part of the slave plantation, slave labor anymore. The slave has run away, and therefore the idea of marronage being a liminal space. You have also talked about these borders, the deterritorialized this thing. So look at this wonderful metaphor. So the runaway slave is actually living outside the apparatus. Yeah, outside. So like a nomad, and yet it is the liminal space which becomes the space of the revolutionary. That is, that you don't have to fall into the dichotomy of slavery and freedom. The act of running away, the act of marronage itself is an emancipatory act. And therefore, I think it was really, really interesting. Of course, I know that even Walter Mignolo has talked about marronage as a kind of delinking, etc. But she says something else, and I'm quoting from your book, Indrani. It says, and she says, and I'm reading in Spanish, of course, necesitamos que la gente subalternizada, los y las condenados y condenadas del mundo, hagamos nuestras propias investigaciones. No que los blancos, los privilegiados de raza y clase, vengan a seguirnos utilizando solo como materia para sus investigaciones. In English, we need the subalternized people, the condemned of the world, to do our own research, not a research by the whites, the privileged by race and class, to continue using us only as material for their research. So she's, of course, voicing out a very big concern of the global south, that the global south, the texts, the visual material, etc., is only used as raw material while the theory comes from the developed north. And I think the idea of the cimarron is one idea which we could replace, Indrani, with the idea of the nomad, and say that here is something which is rooted in the Atlantic slave trade, which is rooted in Spain, Latin America, the Caribbean, and so on and so forth, and gives us a wonderful metaphor of the lines of light, of the lines of light, where in fact, if you look at many of these slave pictures, I was thinking of the Ultima Cena of Aleaca, yeah, Thomas Aleaca. So there, the slave kind of, or was it, yeah, so that's, anyway, I don't remember exactly, but the last scene is that the slave runs away, the slaves have rebelled in a plantation in Cuba, and when the slave runs away, it's the flight. So we don't know whether he's committing suicide.
That's a very good example. Also, the fact that I think that movie there was a scene where the patron is washing his feet.
Yeah.
To
The last
cleanse
supper.
his
Yeah, the cleanse his guilt and so
guilt
on and
and
so
all
forth.
that.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, in the fields, he abuses this slave.
Yeah. So the idea of flight, we don't know when this slave is jumping away from the plantation, from a place, whether he's committing suicide. But the idea of the flight was very much there in slave narratives, and I think therefore the idea of this El Proyecto Decolonial Cimarron really appealed to me. And the fact that these texts need not be just raw material to be used by, through Northern theory, but there can be a theory of the South to deal with them. So that's one. And the final thing, and I'm going to close very soon, is something which she says. And she says, la lucha política tiene que ser en función de proyectos políticos y no de identidades. I think that's such a strong message, because sometimes we in our own country can see the dangers of identity politics. So she says, let's not fall into identity politics, that the la lucha política, the political struggle, has to be based on political projects and not identities. So I think there's also something that we need to take away, that while we talk about race, while we talk about gender, while we talk about,
Intersectionality. So
Yeah,
intersectionality, therefore,
yeah,
is a better.
yeah, I think no, but she's not even talking about that. She's talking about the political projects around the identities, and that's what she's talking about. So the runaway slave, the migrant worker, which you have mapped so wonderfully in your essay. So Sunil, for example, has mapped 158 protest sites of the migrant worker during the COVID pandemic in their thing. So it's such an interesting work, and I really congratulate you for that. So what they're saying is basically that while the nomadism in the Deleuzian framework can actually individualize the worker. Here, most of the papers, you look at Meher's paper, you talk about Shruti's paper, you look at even Trisha's paper, and I can think of so many there, even your paper, Mangalam, where you're talking about the US-Mexico border. Here we are not talking about an individualized worker, but we are talking about the communitarian revolutionary subject, in almost all the papers. So I really think that I think these are the essays that define the book. And as you have rightly pointed out, some of these essays, none of these essays actually, that's what they share in common. I think what they share in common is art, as you have said, as the site of emancipation, and literature, the sites of literature, the sites of art, and the fact of the making of the communitarian revolutionary subject as a common thread that goes through many of these essays. Thank you, that's my first statement.
Thank you. I agree with everything, most of it what you said, but I'm now, let's first move that. I forgot the password. Just a minute, excuse me. ये program लिखना है next. Okay, so next is So now I'm going to introduce Sunil Taminaina. He does not belong to Spanish studies, and so as an outsider, it has been a great pleasure including him in this panel. Also another outsider, of course, is Java. She hasn't read it too long. But I think the fact that he is, I'm not using that. Okay, sorry, not used to your mic. You see that Sunil has got his master's, his MTech from IIT Madras. And I keep wondering, why does he come back and do social science or international studies in JNU? He's a PhD scholar of the Department of International Politics, Organization and Disarmament in JNU. And his research interests broadly span the domain of climate change politics, with a particular focus on international climate change negotiations. Thank you, Sunil, for being here and for agreeing to participate.
Thank you very much. I should thank you for having me. Actually, it's like you mentioned that you're not a great speaker. You write better. I don't know whether I do either of the jobs well, but anyway, let me do it right. Firstly, let me begin by congratulating the editors of the volume, Professor Niels Kimano and Amrit Raj, who is not here, Professor Indrani Mukherjee, for bringing out this very interesting volume. Yes, I hope it's audible. Yeah. Honestly, when I was asked to be a panelist for today's book launch, I had a bit of a conundrum. Professor Mukherjee mentioned that I have no background in Spanish. I'm kind of nomad in a different sense, not necessarily the Deleuzian sense, but yeah. I don't have any formal expertise in neither Spanish studies nor on Latin America as a region, nor for that matter, I'm not very familiar with the debates on, say, art and literature also. But so I thought I'll just share some of my reflections on the book. I presented one of the paper that's part of the book currently, but I thought I'll share some of the reflections that I have on the book, looking at it from a current day perspective and trying to locate it look at its significance, taking one particular theme, I'll take the theme of, say, like the visual documentation. Visual documentation, and the book also refers to visual renditions, and the circulation and recirculation, and try to situate the role in a world of mediatized realities. And when I say mediatized realities, I refer here to the increasing centrality of mass media, both the traditional and the social media varieties, to real world events as well as the perceptions of them. So this mediatization as a concept, as a concept actually has become part of is emerging, which alludes to the centrality of media in the nature of the realities that we shape as well as how we perceive those realities as well. So by seeking to view some dimensions of contemporary conflict zones through such a lens, I attempt to bring out what I view as this book's significance in current times, as I mentioned earlier. So when speaking about conflict zones today, like one cannot but begin with referring to the ongoing genocide in Gaza, and I kind of put forward my intervention, keeping the ongoing genocide as an illustration to make some points. Remember, this is a genocide that for the first time, a tragic first, that being televised in real time, both across the traditional media as well as social media. So there are few aspects to this, to the visual documentation that's happening here. One major way is through the self-recorded videos of the people of Gaza, the everyday people of Gaza, who have been documenting their own suffering, be it bombings, be it killings, be it hunger, starvation, and so on, through self-recorded videos and posting them on the social media handles, and it takes a life of its own, as Professor Mukherjee mentioned in the book as well. It's these visual, and again, I'm sorry, like I'm taking some liberty here in the sense that I'm just not restricted to visual art per se in the narrow sense, but visual documentation, visual literatures in an expanded sense. So far from these may not be art forms, but these are visual literatures in a broader sense of the term. So how does so these visual literatures are not just tools as the book argues, but they can take a life of its own. They do, and they inspire both resistance locally in Palestine as well as opposition globally. Like these wide and open repository of self-recorded videos of people from Gaza documenting their suffering on a real-time basis has in some way or the other, if not alleviate the suffering, has contributed to the opposition to the war in Gaza. And secondly, it also, as many argue, it also removed the possibility of a post facto argument possibly given, as in the case of, say, the genocide in Rwanda in '94, the killing of the genocide of the Tutsi people, or the Sri Lankan Tamils in 2009. The structures of international system underpinned by the Western imperial powers and the institutions they have built have post facto justified them, saying that no, we hadn't known that this particular thing was happening. We hadn't known the extent of the genocide that's happening, the killings that was happening in real time. We hadn't known, and hence we couldn't act on it, and hence they are not culpable in that sense. But this particular real-time visual documentation eliminates that particular possibility. No, you are culpable. You know what's happening. It's not, and you're complicit, possibly actively so. That's one. And secondly, I also, again, as the introduction chapter in this book argues, these are also can be read as, quote, work as prohibited histories in the making. These particular visual documentations that are being undertaken. Another dimension, I again go back to Gaza. And this kind of documentation, this kind of visual documentation, visual renditions, as the book argues, they can take a life of its own and in a strange ways also. Like, for instance, I refer back to the killing of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar just last week. And the drone footage, the Israeli forces have sent a drone to capture this particular, to examine what's the status of this person. And Sinwar, who was covered in rubble, as about a third of Gaza currently is, does this, what many take it as a courageous act of resistance. His arm was amputated. He was in the final moments of death, literally. He throws a stick at the drone, which the fact that this drone captured the footage and the Israeli forces have released this footage has led to a life of its own, in the sense that there are resistance graffiti being made out of this particular thing. It's almost began to take a status of legend, the martyrdom of Sinwar. So these are few particular things that and closer home also in contemporary attention in the recent times, in the mass uprising in Bangladesh, the conflict in Manipur. These are also instances where visual documentation has powerfully not just documented, but although the intention may be to document or not, or may not be just restricted to that for any number of reasons, but they constantly shape the nature and the trajectories of the conflict. So when the subject matter of the book deals with conflict zones, and the book again like expands the horizon of what constitutes conflict zone. The old notions of contestations of sovereignty over territory. The book helps further expanding the notions by including struggles around citizenship and borders to struggles against patriarchy and communalism. So I try to locate, for instance, there are several papers in this book. For instance, Parichay Patra's paper deals with how cinema, another visual tool, another visual documentation, if one can look at it that way, cinema as something that constitutes history as well as interpreting history for us as well, as Patra argues. So he questions how contemporary visual representation, the nature of contemporary visual representation, and the potential of change that visual representation can bring in. Patra dealt with, or Prachi Malik and Khushbu Bhutani through their paper, the one image they describe of a student from Jamia Millia Islamia who was confronting the apparatus of the state, the Delhi police, with so much courage, and that invariably became a symbolic image of the citizenship protests that erupted back in 2019-2020, and inspired further resistance, or even Devashri Samanta's paper deals with like mentions about the documentary Vivek by Anand Patwardhan, which also again visually documenting the lives and the murders of thinkers and of activists that Patwardhan so wonderfully and so painstakingly documented. So, and to mention Sunil Kumar's paper also, like the Muslim rickshaw driver Rafiq and the conversations he has with the Uma, a wealthy teacher. All this, there are several papers which bring out this, the potential of visual documentation, visual representation, visual art so powerfully and can not just be restricted to symbolism, but can have the potential to change the trajectories. I'm sorry. I think I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And these are conversations that never end. And we have to only imagine a stop. Time is not real. Time is not real, huh? But of course for him it is. He's the director. For us it's not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Time
Now,
is a mental construct. It's true. You were so successful.
we'll continue now with our next panelist, Dr. CJ Mangalam. He's come all the way from Karnataka for this event, and we couldn't be happier about it. He's an assistant professor of Spanish at the Central University of Karnataka, where there is a PhD program as well as
MA program, I didn't know about it. They also have
as well as MA, okay, program. He's been part of the Erasmus Mundus scholarship, and he has been also in a funded research program in Mexico. His specialization involves theorizing graffiti and murals under border studies, also translation studies and post-colonial studies. He's in the book he talks about the world of Chicano murals, and over to you.
Thank you very much. It's indeed a very special moment for me. I've been there at CUK for the last 5 years. We have been trying to take baby steps towards establishing the presence of Hispanism there, and it's only the second such university, Central University at that, in the whole of South India after FLU, where Spanish is taught.
Which university?
It's called Central University of Karnataka. It's among all those central universities which were established in 2009. So, and the department itself was established in 2019. And I'm the only and the first and the only faculty member for Spanish there.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we have 4 languages. It's a department. So we have this peculiar structure where we have 4 languages combined together and forming this department called Department of Foreign Languages Studies. And we teach German, Japanese, Arabic and Spanish, 2 European and 2 Asian languages, maybe, perhaps. So we have been trying, especially with regard to Spanish. The PhD program was initiated in 2020, and we have had a couple of rounds of discussions with the administration there to persuade them to also start a PG program, and they have thankfully agreed. So from next year onward, which is 2025-26, we are going to have a PG program in Spanish. So I came here all the way from Karnataka to specially let you know of this humble effort which we have put in there, and to also seek your support there, because we have been put this challenge that, look, we are giving you this PG program, but you have to show us this strength, and so we have to really work hard. We are working towards it, and I really wish that we have a good start to begin with. And as for my own research work, I have done my PhD under Indrani's supervision on a text from Mexico and also on Eduardo Galeano. And of late I have consciously been trying to write in Hindi as well. So I have written in English, in Spanish, and I'm also now ventured into Hindi, which is my second language. My mother tongue is Bhojpuri, so I also take inputs from there when I translate, for instance, from Spanish to Hindi. So I have translated Eduardo Galeano's book Mujeres into Hindi, and it's due to be published next year, early next year. And I've also written a research article recently on translation tradition in medieval Spain, where I've talked about Escuela de Traducción in Toledo and a lot of other things interrelated. And recently I've written another article with a research scholar of mine, my first research scholar there, and we have written an article in Hindi on Spanish immigrant cinema. So that also has been submitted, that article has been submitted, and we hope that it will be published. So yeah. I'm really sorry. I'm so excited that I really wanted to project my department here.
We'd like to know what you
Because it somehow gets, it's invisibilized. So I wanted everyone to know that we do exist.
I hope it does not become a conflict.
So about the book, as I was browsing through the chapters and Indrani's introduction and some chapters which I was able to read, I had a couple of ideas which I wrote down and just would like to share. The book, in my opinion, is very contemporary. I think it will always remain contemporary because the power hierarchies it decodes, and through the artworks which seek to deconstruct and creatively undo these hierarchies are not going away anytime soon, sadly. So are the nomadic voices, hisses, clamors of undoing the meta-narratives and mega-structures of dominance, power, authority and silence. They'll keep buzzing, producing uncomfortable sounds and echoes of subject positions reclaimed from forced marginalities. So these aspects I was able to see in a couple of papers, and especially, for instance, when one thinks of Pankaj Roy's paper where he talks about aestheticization of politics and politicization of the arts. So the first, which is aestheticization of politics, was a project of the Nazi Germany, and whereas the politicization of the art is an initiative taken by social movements across the world. And Pankaj Roy talks about a couple of these from in Latin America and India. And so there, as Indrani says, that it's not merely about using visual materials, tools. It's about your own corporality, your own body becoming part of it, and that's how embodied thinking. And you're part of the whole process, and it's not merely to decorate your surrounding as governments would do through propaganda, to circulate propaganda, but it's actually to articulate your own subject positions and not merely remaining as objects of these mega hierarchies. For instance, we could see this same thing happening at the USA-Mexico border as well, where people, the Chicanos, and there are various marginalities within Chicano group, and they speak a couple of tongues, as illustrated so vividly by Gloria Ansaldúa in her numerous writings, and they take these, Pankaj refers to this, spectacle, this theme of spectacle, where everything is made a spectacle to just be there as mere, passive spectator, whereas these producers of such arts, they change these and they change the whole grammar, and they, in fact, just as Brazilian anthropologists like Oswaldo de Campos would theorize anthropophagia, they basically make use of, they were all these mega narratives, symbols. For instance, the murals which the Chicano artists put, many of these murals make use of figures like Mickey Mouse, and Mickey Mouse is then in this satirical tone labeled as Migra Mouse, mimicking the border police which the migrants have to face every day. So this we see very vividly in the mural arts which the Chicano artists put up, and so with all these we come to see for ourselves very clearly how these subjectivities, which are nomadic in many sense, and they basically mark their presence, their signatures, uh, through and in and through these always unstable uh, spatialities where they always are reconstructing powers and grammars of power, hierarchies of power, to make their invisibilities in some sort of visible presence. Yeah. That's all. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you have to introduce her. No, I have to. Oh. Yeah. So this is called division of labor. आपने इसको बंद कर दिया. Yeah, so now it's my turn. Let me introduce. I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Java Singh is a visiting faculty of the IGNU. She graduated from the IIM Ahmedabad, and again, like Sunil, I don't know why, she came to study Spanish studies in JNU. Her expertise covers speciality and gender in Latin American women's writing. She is also a comparatist, a cultural worker, and an author of short stories. She has traveled through Spain and Latin America and has published research articles in peer-reviewed journals, and she has published 2 books or 3 books, I don't know, from Springer and Vernon. Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Indrani, for asking me to be here, and Oscar for giving this platform. This is truly a nomadic space. We are sitting in Instituto Cervantes talking in English with the Hanuman Arti going on in the background behind us. So you don't need any explanation of nomadism. And Indrani said, good, they've put you the last because you're good at summing up things. So that's really my expertise. I sum up things well. I want to highlight some of...
You don't have to just sum up. And carry on from where the last.
Yes, I will be mindful of the time. I realize we are drawing too close. I want to, there's just so much intellectual energy on this panel that I don't know if I can do justice. So Sonia Ma'am, she mentioned the lettered city, and that is one concept that also sort of wafted through my mind when I was reading the book, that if there is a frontier to be crossed, it's between la ciudad letrada y la ciudadanía incorporada. So Indrani, while we were having our pre-panel discussions, she said this book is about doing with the mind and thinking with the body. So to really, in every sense, borrar esta frontera, cuerpo y mente. And Sonia Ma'am also mentioned, roots, that this whole nomadism is rooted as far back as the triangle, the golden triangle for slavery. And nomadism, the theory of nomadism plays a lot on the 2 English words which are pronounced the same way, R-O-O-T and R-O-U-T-E-S. So I don't know which one you meant, ma'am, but both are equally true. No, it is rooted and rooted in those ships that carry the bodies from their place of birth to their place of exploitative work. And the metaphor of the Cimarron, I think, so powerful. The Haiti revolt was also at the hands of Cimarrons. And this is the reason why nomads are able to become a war machine, because they have the protection of a space. And ma'am also mentioned that nomadism is essentially a spatial metaphor, that they can go back to places of refuge, places of safety after mounting their attack. The book that Indrani and I had co-edited, that focused equally on Rosi Braidotti's interpretation of nomadism, which was more to do with bio-centered egalitarian ethics. And I think Antara Mukherjee's paper resonates a lot with that. She writes about the Worli revolt, which is for the protection of the RA forests in Mumbai, which are being... the trees are being culled for some development work. And it is also emblematic of, one of the things that is written by the editors in the introduction, that, that artivism, this kind of artivism that is highlighted in the book, breaks any passive aestheticization for domesticated performance. And Andhra Mukherjee also says, the lyrics are bold, they are not metaphoric, they directly attack, so very much the war machine talking back to the institutions of power, saying that, you call yourself patriots, where are you now when the land is being destroyed? And we have some more authors in the audience here. There's C. Siddharth, who has written a paper on Bharati Mukherjee's Desirable Daughters. And it is very enriching to, she's one of the canon writers of diaspora literature in English. And it is very enriching to have new lenses to view these writings. The panelists, of course, have spoken a bit about their papers, and it shows the notion of, what is art? Art with a capital A and art with a small a. So are only aestheticized visual representations art, which of course happens in the case of graffiti. But when we are talking about in-time transmission of genocide and the gesture of flinging a stick at the drone, which itself, it is so emotive. Flinging with an amputated hand, flinging a stick at the drone is such a powerful image to talk about the resistance, which is completely nomadic in the sense, it will mount an attack and then it will go back to its places of refuge. So it's important, that's another frontier that needs to be raised, right? Is it art? And then you also said that it gets aestheticized, right? So resistance graffiti has come out of that. So this sort of, big question mark on the autonomy of art, because now the translation is so quick. And ma'am's paper, she was very humble and did not talk about her paper at all. That's about translation. So I think, ma'am, I really want to close with this question to you. Do you see translation also as artivism, and nomadic artivism at that?
Thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead. So we have already started the question answer session. Just briefly, I didn't anticipate this, but sticking to my script, yeah. I would just briefly like to introduce two people who have done me tremendous favor. Number one is Mr. Sumit Saraswati. Please stand up. I just want to introduce. He's the designer who has done this cover page. He's a graduate from Srishti School of in Bangalore, and he works in a corporate. That's very boring. That's it. Thank you very much, Sumit. And he has done it pro bono. And the other person I want to really thank very much. He has disappeared. Where is he? Shubho. Oh, please come forward. Nobody can see you. Shubho, he's my publisher. And, I didn't know. It's a very small publisher, not well known at all. And as part of the Cimarrones ethics, I'm very happy to say, before my book was published, he has a book published by Amartya Sen, written by him, and he went to Tantiniketan and he launched the book himself. So all of you to kind of encourage small publishers, and that is why, whatever, by accident or by intent, I found him, and I really want to thank him to take up this job. Thank you, Shubho. Let's carry on with the debates. Thank you.
I'm going to be really short in answering this question, that whether translation is a site of struggle, there is no doubt about it. What gets translated, who translates, how it is translated. I'll give a very small example. It's so for example, when I was translating La Familia de Pascual Duarte, Camilo José Cela, it was entrusted to me by the Embassy of Spain, because at that time Cela had just been awarded the Nobel Prize, 1989. And so, so there was this, I was politically very active at that time, and so the political question was, Cela had been a part of, and I had done my work on post-Franco literature, and everybody knew that Cela had been a part of the Francoist censorship and so on and so forth. So why did I choose to translate it? I could have said no. So it wasn't just the pressure of being young and, obliging the embassy. But I also feel that sometimes you choose to translate something because these texts, a word that has been used a lot here, have a life of their own. And what the family of Pascual Duarte, for example, meant in 1940s in Spain was what I had in mind when I accepted the translation. So, what am I talking about? I'm talking about a writer who was a part of the fascist censorship, but writes one of the most honest novels of post-Franco Spain. And as a translator, the big challenge was, there were several, but number one, to accept to do that translation at all or not. And it is not a post facto justification, but the fact is that the works themselves have a life of their own. And as a translator, you deal with the work and not with not just with the writer. Yeah, you deal with the text and what the text, because the text has a life of its own, So I think this is, and a body of its own, absolutely. So that is one thing about translation. The second thing is that translations are not easy to publish. You know that there are copyright issues and there are, so you want to translate so many things that you think are, should be brought out, and therefore I think really the work that Mangalam has done, I don't know how you managed to get, and recently even I for that matter, the fact that we've been able to, as translators, negotiate the copyright and translate writers that we want to translate. It has taken a long, long struggle to get there. Otherwise, most of the time we are translating entrusted text. What is it called? Commissioned translations, yeah. So the translation certainly is a side where power operates in a very naked way. And I certainly feel that what you translate is very important, in terms of the selection that you're making, and of course the process of translation itself. I'll give a very small example again from the family of Pascual Duarte. So there is a passage in which the woman, her young child has died from a draft of wind, and she is actually kind of cursing the husband, saying that your seed was so weak that it couldn't stand the winter wind. So that's where it says. Now the entire curse, it was clear that I have translated it using the tum and the tu form, actually, Hindi mein, using the tu form. But my professor, my respected professor, Professor Gadre, for example, has done the Marathi translation and has used the aap version, So these are decisions, very small decisions, which the translator takes, and it just changes the complexion of the text. So I'll just say that much to you.
I'll just add one example, if you allow.
Yes. And yeah, I'll just say something about the article, the chapter.
If I have something, an example you put, in my opinion, and I may be wrong, I feel the translation, for me, as I understand translation, which I think translation has to be faithful to the original, and I think I don't think that you have that choice there, because you have to see the correspondences between tu men up in Marathi and Spanish, or tu men up in Hindi and Spanish, and do it accordingly, we know that Hindi has three, two, which Spanish has only two, perhaps was, But I mean that in this particular instance, if you are a good translator, you have first to analyze both languages in their context and go beyond, personal choices. This, and respect the two men up balance in both languages, if it is possible.
I agree.
Well, the example I wanted to share was from my own Hindi translation of Mujeres by Galeano. So there is a story, the title of the story is La Fiesta que no fue. So it's about women who are there at a brothel in a city near the port of Buenos Aires in Argentina, and during dictatorship years what happens is one day workers have declared strike, and the army is sent to break that strike, and many workers are killed, and after killing the workers, the people, the military personnel, they come back to this city, small town, to basically avail the services of these women. And the women, they basically shut the door on their nose, and they, just give them this very unexpected response, shouting them as assassins, get out of here. And Galliano signs of the story by just writing two phrases, las putas, las dignas. So while I was translating these, especially the last two phrases, I was really at a loss as to how to convey this sense, because there is this interplay of how we look at las putas, but then it's contradicted by las dignas. And for instance, in Hindi, you have this, or Hindustani rather, you have this story writer, Saadat Hasan Manto. He writes about such characters, and he basically dignifies them. He basically writes about them in a way that makes them visible and as active, sort of players of their life, not merely passive recipients, just as these Argentine women are here in this particular story. So when I was translating, I had to choose between various Hindi equivalents, because there is this sanitized Hindi word for that, las putas, which would not have done justice. So I went for the word which we use as an expletive, as an abuse, and I used it, and then I combined it with, the phrase which would bring out their dignity. So that was a
Everybody's curious.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Don't give away.
yeah, because that's
By the translation.
yeah. So that was that in fact introduced me also, because as a translator, till then I was not aware of this power play. That introduced me to this, how delicate this whole thing, and how as translator we can in fact provoke the reader, as Saadat Hasan Manto constantly does through his writings, to basically confront this reality. So as Galliano is trying us to do. So in Hindi I have tried to
Can I
do.
respond to this? I'm so excited. My God. Thank you. I just should also add, apart from the nomadic subterfuges, another thing I had in mind is about this whole relationship of subject and agency. When we are discussing this, the papers and the ideas that we have been talking about, one very important thing is about the shifting agency and subject positions between subject and object, or about shared, what Achil Mbembe, nowadays I'm reading a lot of African writers. I used to read earlier, but now they're giving me fresh insights. So he talks about shared agency and subjectivities and shared agency. So there is no scope for any, although you're talking about the choice and the compulsions and the difficulties, but I think again this reminds us, and speaking through translation, that it is also about shared agencies of subjects and objects. The objects or subjects may be human or non-human, and the privilege of the human at this is debunked. So I think this is very important. So the choice or the compulsion are kind of become fields of play. They are not fixed, and I think the translator, as well as the reader, as well as the text, I think struggles with it. So I think if you look at it from that perspective.
I just want to add one more thing, that when we think of translation, we are only thinking of literary translation. But recently there is this, Gayatri Spivak has got this series of what she calls elsewhere texts. And basically she says that what we need to translate is also theory. So she has for example, the text that I read is René Zavaleta Mercado, a Bolivian thinker, his writings on the National Popular. And I think this is such an important move, because it is often said, and I've said it earlier, that we believe that we write good literature, we write good, but the theory comes from elsewhere. No, the theory will come from the north. So I think the idea of translation should include translation activism. Translation is a site of activism, which
Because it is also embodied, because translators can also get killed. There was a Bangladeshi, and I forget the name, translator of Garcia Marquez who was killed. But I don't have the reference now. Perumaludin also. I mean.
But he was killed as a translator or for a
He translated, and I don't have the exact reference now. It's something I published earlier, but I have this. So translation is also embodied walking, like Luisa Valenzuela's Escribir con el cuerpo. So she says as she's walking through the streets of Buenos Aires, she's aware that she's being watched. But even that walking and as she's being watched is a kind of writing. It's a writing with the body. And I think translation also is definitely. I don't have the exact examples and the names.
Susan Gassner in her translation study talks about Etienne Doyen.
Yeah.
In 16th century, he was actually killed.
Yeah.
Because he, in his translation, appeared that he was questioning the immortality of, God or something.
Yeah. So translators earlier had to be pure. The Buddhists, the Chinese who came to learn Buddhist texts, they had to purify themselves. Only then they could translate the sacred script, of Buddha. So from there on, that's all. Thank you. Any other questions? Please ask questions.
Yeah, now we'll ask the audience to ask their questions. We don't have much time, so be precise. Maybe we can take 2 questions.
No questions. Enough.
No, let's
So good to have Enrique here.
I don't know, maybe we can continue the discussion over chai.
Okay, so please, there is tea outside. Please have, and then please buy the book. You get it at 20% discount and with a signature from the. So, please buy. And students also, if you have the GRF, don't say that you can't afford.